Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight, and the third session, extension session, that is forming part of Renew's Sustainable House Day program for 2024. My name is Rachel Goldlust, and I am very pleased to be hosting this event. We have people tuned in from all over the country tonight from a wide variety of unceded lands. I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people of Central Victoria. I express my gratitude in the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and my hope that we may walk forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. Here at Renew, we are very grateful for the support of our sponsors, and particularly those that make Sustainable House Day and this series possible. You too could support Renew further by becoming a member or by subscribing to one of our great magazines, Sanctuary or Renew. There is a link in the chat if you'd like to slip in now and take a peek at what membership to our organisation would look like. So tonight we're going to be tackling foundations to finishes in a session that will dig deep into the many ways we can source, use and uncover the safety, appropriateness and longevity of different building materials. We will be drawing on the expertise of our wonderful panellists to talk through the pros and cons of various natural materials such as strawbale, hempcrete, cork and recycled timber, as well as exploring innovative new materials and the ideal environments for their use. For those that have not met me before, I am the sustainability researcher here at Renew, and among the many things that I do, I've been working on the Getting Off Gas Toolkit and helping with the Green Rebuild Toolkit. I'm a qualified town planner and with a passion for natural building styles and modalities and a long-standing interest in sustainable, energy efficient and comfortable homes that tread lightly on the earth. I've worked in environmental education and love helping people find out about ways they can interact with sustainable design, materials and passive solar ideas. So this is our third session in a series of 8 designed to give you a deeper understanding of sustainable design principles, whether you're embarking on your own build, renovation or retrofit, or looking for your next rental home. If you missed the first 2 sessions and want to attend all of the others, you can still purchase an extension session pass that will give you access to all the recordings as they become available. And you can attend the up and coming sessions live. We'll put that link into the chat. So tonight I'm joined by 3 very special people, experts in their field, who will all be approaching this complex topic from different angles. First up, I'd like to welcome Talina Edwards from Envirotecture, an award-winning sustainable design firm based in Victoria and New South Wales. Talina is both an architect and the director of Envirotecture and leads the Victorian team. Talina cares deeply about nature-aligned buildings that are healthy for people and planet and appears regularly at conferences and events to share her passion for more regenerative architecture. Envirotecture have been designing sustainable homes across Australia for over 25 years and have been proudly involved since the very first Sustainable House Day. Thank you so much for joining us, Talina.
Thank you.
And next, we have Matt Carland, who is a passive house expert, building science nerd, and builder located in Melbourne with over 13 years of experience in the construction industry. Matthew is the director of Carland Constructions, who work in collaboration with architects and designers to provide clients with what they believe is the most sustainable form of building possible. Welcome to the session, Matt.
Hey guys.
And last but not least, please welcome Sarah Corbett, who will share the invaluable perspective of the owner-builder experience. Sarah Corbett and David Bruce are the homeowners of Lionville Hemp House, a featured home of SHD 2024, a very small but very beautiful home nestled opposite the Wombat State Forest in regional Victoria. Sarah and David built the hempcrete home with a small group of volunteers. It is deceptively simple. Design features are enhanced by the use of salvage materials, and we'll pop a link to her beautiful home into the chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Sarah. Welcome. So during our discussion, I'll be putting viewers' questions to our panel. Please put your questions into the Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of the screen as we go, and we will endeavour to get to them as many of them as we can. Please be mindful that questions that are very specific or detailed may not be appropriate for a panel event setting. And as I always like to say in these sessions, the best kind of questions are actually questions. So let's get started. What is it that makes a sustainable home? What are the most appropriate building materials, and how do they stack up against each other and non-sustainable materials when looking at them through the eye of a decision-making matrix? What is healthy living, and how can we think more about materials when designing our spaces to not only be comfortable, but good for our health and good for the planet? So I'm going to start with you, Talina, with that in mind. And I would like to ask you what drew you to and what made you decide to work so intimately with natural materials.
Thank you, Rachel. Before I answer that, I would also like to acknowledge that I'm tuning in from Wadawurrung country tonight, here in central Victoria, and I do pay my deep respect to the traditional custodians as well, and their care for country resonates deeply with me, and we can all learn from that. And thank you for your beautiful acknowledgement to country as well. So I grew up in the Eltham area on the outskirts of Melbourne, which was Alistair Knox region, you know, lots of beautiful mud brick homes, timber, bush poles, natural materials. So, and sort of that solar passive design. So that was kind of in my blood growing up. It spoke to me. I loved it. And then went on to study architecture and was really drawn to anything to do with healthy buildings. And these subjects were often electives. They weren't the core curriculum 20, 25 years ago, whenever it was. This is changing, I've been told, but back then it wasn't. So anything to do with like organic architecture or nature-aligned design, honest materials, site-specific and climate-specific, loved all of that. But anything to do with building science really drew me in as well. And so I got called a bit of a nerd because most people were skipping those boring classes. But I wanted to understand what sick building syndrome was all about and what that meant and how we had a responsibility with our decisions, how that would influence people's lives. So I sort of went down that path and have continued to do so. So anything to do with healthy homes and sustainability that's going to be better for people and planet is kind of my jam. So thanks for having me.
Sounds perfect. And then we love having you on these sessions, Talina. There's a few things I'll get back to on that, but I'll move on to Sarah for the moment and ask you what was the impetus for you to build a sustainable house, and how did you come to choose Hempcrete as the product that you wanted to work with?
Well, I've been interested in sustainable houses forever. I'm an environmentalist. I'm frustrated with the poor quality of most builds in Australia. I'm impatient about climate action, and I thought this is something that I can do. I'm really passionate about, want to walk the talk, and I also want to show people what's possible. And on a limited budget as well. So not grand designs and whoops, I spent 2 million extra. Wanted to show what you could do realistically yourself in a very doable, achievable and highly sustainable approach.
Amazing. And you had a fair few visitors to your house on Sustainable House Day?
We had such a great day. We were sold out. We had 100 people through the house and lots of people missed out. So we may be doing it next year, but a lot of interest, I guess, in Hempcrete at the moment, where the industry, now that there's local supply of the building materials, and it is an incredible material to live in. I can vouch for that. And I think a lot of people want to see the proof in the pudding. So yeah, lots of interest and lots of great questions. We've also had some master's students from RMIT come and visit from their thermal performance and sustainable buildings program. And yeah, really a lot of interest, which was great fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. We'll definitely get back to talking about your amazing house. And I would urge anyone to go click on the link and just have a look at Sarah's house so that you'll understand a little bit what we're talking about during the chat. I'll bring you in, Matt, since you come from much more of a conventional building perspective, what has drawn you into this direction to be so passionate about sustainable building materials?
So I started sort of building in, I think it was about 2010. I did my apprenticeship as a carpenter, the standard sort of build frame with a stick frame, timber frame, and it was all about just getting the house up and who cares about anything else. Part of me was always questioning why we needed to build, why we built this way, and didn't kind of make sense. And I was a kid who had allergies from asthma, and I take that many Telfast or Zyrtec tablets, antihistamines a day. And there was like there's got to be something towards this. We have to solve these issues, or there's got to be another way. And for me, I just went down a rabbit hole of understanding and started reading about the way we build and looking to overseas models on construction. And the data was all there, the evidence was there. And I just went down this big rabbit hole of understanding why we build and the reasons why we build, and how we should build. So it was one of those things where I finished my apprenticeship, started my own business, and called myself a sustainable builder. In hindsight, I definitely wasn't sustainable. I just said I was sustainable with no real data or information to back that up. But it kind of started this journey of like, well, as I grew a little bit older, I needed to put sort of like my money where my mouth is. And so I thought, hey, let's actually go all in on this whole sustainable thing, for ethical reasons, but also because that's what I believed in. So it just become one big journey of learning and making plenty of mistakes to get there, but it's one that I'm sort of super proud of where we are today.
Yeah, and I guess I would ask the question, what took you so long? No, so what's taking the building industry so long to get there? And if you had your light bulb moment, why are there not more builders like you, do you think?
One comes down to like, and I respect that companies need to make money, and it comes down to a bottom dollar, and I respect that, but there's probably not enough government incentives to push this a little bit harder. We have a very slow planning policy where we're not championing sustainable projects. There's a lot of roadblocks through many, like trade schools aren't teaching kids how to build correctly, and not and teaching in methods that were sort of constructed back in the 70s, because that's how they learn, and they haven't changed anything in the 50 years. There's also the fact that we're just lazy. It's easy just to keep doing what we've always done because that's what we've done it. But I'm here to challenge that notion and sort of, push that really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we talked about that in the first extension session, about picking your trades wisely and finding people that were aligned with your vision and with the way that you think you want to build. But a lot of people just don't have access to the kinds of trades and professionals that they want to engage with, because they don't find people out there that are going to be able to understand what they want. So I'm going to link back into what I highlighted in the opening about the decision-making matrix. And I was going to go to you, Talina, to talk a little bit more about some of the things. I've got it in front of me and it's very long. So what were some of the highlights that you could outline about said matrix for particularly materials?
There's so many things to discuss there, isn't there? Look, they say the most sustainable building is the one that already exists, or the one that is not built, because anything we do is going to have a negative impact on the planet, right? So we are always trying. The true definition of sustainability is about trying to do less bad for future generations. So there is this shift towards being more regenerative and trying to do more good with all of our decisions and have a positive impact. But when that comes to building materials, it's really hard. Like, there is always going to be compromise. As Matt mentioned, budget has to be a part of it. It has to be fit for purpose. It needs to be durable, resilient. And then, of course, we want to make sure it is healthy if possible. But natural doesn't always mean it's the best fit for purpose either. But if there is an option to do that and it's going to be healthier for the planet and for people, then that's what we want to be leaning towards. But yeah, there's a whole can of worms to bring up in there, and I'll throw it to the other people, our other guests as well, to add to that, because I've just touched on the surface.
Well, go for it, Sarah or Matt. So what would be your top sort of 3 or 4, maybe Sarah, what were the top 3 or 4 things that you would have considered high on your decision-making matrix when you set upon your design and your materials?
Thanks, Rachel. I think we wanted to build something small and enough for our needs. We didn't think we needed a media room and 5 bedrooms and paying it off for the rest of our lives. We wanted something to be enough for our needs. We wanted to have low waste on the building site, and we wanted to choose materials that would be durable, but also, good for the environment, good for the planet. So, the choice we made is quite a good one in that regard as well, which I can talk about later.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask you, like, in terms of other than the hemp, how did you go about making those decisions about other materials?
We knew we wanted to build something sustainable and small, and it was sort of fortuitous actually, because we went to the Lost Trades Fair at Kyneton and we were just starting that research. I'd only built a place before, so I'm always researching new materials, and we actually bumped into someone doing a hempcrete demonstration with a blowtorch and showing how it doesn't burn, and very quickly started researching that against other options. Also, we're looking for an option that was easy for us to build ourselves. We both owner built previously, and so we wanted something simple and beautiful and high performing. So it was really quite lucky that we bumped into that whole hempcrete world fairly early in that research process. And I knew enough as a Renew subscriber and member, I knew enough about what I was looking for through that knowledge.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Matt, how do you talk to people about all of those sorts of things on the said sustainability decision matrix?
So for me, the first thing is like bigger is not better. And I think that's a huge misconception that we have, that I need to have a huge home because that's what my neighbors have, and they've got the two en suites plus the theatre room plus whatever. So just to give you a bit of data, Australia has the biggest houses per square meter in the world, around 214 square meters, I think. And we compare that to around Europe, where we're looking around, say, 83 to 70, I think UK is. So we're building 2 to 3 times bigger than the rest of the world. And the bigger we build, the more it costs. Not only to run, that means it's more expensive to fit out, expensive to keep clean. And it's always, everyone's building better, bigger for the future generation. So the biggest thing is building for what you need and the people that are going to live inside the house. I think on average, we live in our houses for about 11.5 years. So trends change over time. So if you're building for someone that might live it in the future, most likely that's changed or it's not in that house anymore. So the first thing is that. The second thing is following basic building physics. So water kills buildings. We know that. It's the biggest claim on any insurance claim in Australia and probably across the world. So we want to manage water and we want to use the correct materials to manage that water. So there are many materials out there, and we want to pick those materials that do its right, the right job for its situation. So that's where I'd start to look at. So the thing for me is it's the most unsustainable thing that you can do is build a home twice because it's failed.
And I mean, I guess the distance, the whole, travel for materials is another consideration. I mean, we didn't used to have options. I mean, we've kind of gone full circle in a way. We didn't used to have options because we didn't have imported materials, and now we have almost too much imported materials, but they're very expensive. So we're looking locally again. So how do you work with that kind of problem?
I'm going to be honest and upfront. A lot of the stuff we get is from overseas purely because it's a better product. Specifically our wraps for our external wrap for our weather resistant barriers, and even our windows. A lot of the profiles are coming from overseas through Germany or Poland. So we're typically looking at what is the best for the project and works within the budget. We want the building to last, and I'd rather put in a really good product that comes from across the other side of the world that is going to last 100 years than something that I'm needing to take out in 5 to 6 years because it has failed.
And look, a lot of the travel miles for something to come from overseas, even from Europe, not as close as China, something's coming from Europe on a ship, it's way less. I can't remember the stats, but it's way less of travel, embodied carbon in that compared to going from, Perth to Sydney across the country. There's a lot of data around that. So at the moment, we can't feel guilty about those travel miles, as Matt said, when there isn't enough. We want to see the Australian industry pick up, and things like windows, we often are specifying those coming from overseas because we can't get locally sourced ones that are as good a quality, as good a price, have Forest Stewardship Council certified timber, all of this. So it is taking all that into consideration. But when you're talking about when you're trying to make a decision about, well, what's better or worse, one of the first things really is around the indoor air quality and our health, because that's something we can't offset. You can't put a price on that. We should be caring about that. And this became really apparent, obviously, during COVID and the lockdowns, everyone's stuck inside and realizing that our homes weren't as good as we thought because we spent so much time at school or work or wherever we were. But the reality is we spend 90% of time indoors. And so we're not outside running around in the fresh air. If we are somewhere regional where there might be fresh air, not at this time of year, there's a lot of wood fire smoke, which is polluting the atmosphere. But when it comes to being indoors, we want that healthy indoor because it does impact our health. And in terms of our temperature and our comfort, that's really important too. And then the second thing really is around that responsible sourcing. So it's hard to get, there's a lot of greenwash out there, but you need to keep asking those questions around, is timber coming from well-managed forests, trying to find out if there's any slave labor, if it is coming from other parts of the world. So trying to make sure that you know where the product is coming from. And then there's another thing called the red list, which has toxic chemicals. And this is a bit further down the list because some of those chemicals can be in materials such a tiny amount, but it's worth trying to understand what those chemicals are. In the same way, are they in our food? Are they in our clothes? So understanding that a lot of materials are toxic and it's worth looking at those. And then the fourth one is embodied carbon, because we want to reduce that, absolutely, and stop putting more CO2 into the atmosphere. But there are options to choose more wisely and also offset, although that's the last resort. So that's kind of the four things we try and look at as a priority, in addition to all the other stuff.
Selena, just at this, can I just loop back to something you said on sick building syndrome? So just so people that understand what that is, essentially that it's creating an environment inside our house that makes us unwell and sick. And it's a chronic disease, and it's actually quite prevalent through parts of Canada. It originally started through Canada, where they built homes introducing insulation, because insulation was an idea to lower our thermal resistance and make our homes warmer. And that happened during the oil crisis. So energy got expensive, but that changed the whole physics of our construction, because prior to that, what was actually happening is our heaters were heating up the wall structure and drying out the structure. But once we introduced insulation, that changed the whole what was happening inside the building. So this is a problem that happened in Canada. It was in a problem that went to America, and the Canadians passed it to the Americans, who then passed it to New Zealand. It's estimated to be a $43 billion fix in New Zealand at the moment, and it's coming in here. So it's a very, very important topical discussion at the moment.
Sarah, I'm sure you've got some things to add to that about healthy buildings. How do you find your home in terms of not just physical, but emotional health, I guess?
Yeah, it is such a beautiful, peaceful space. So acoustically, it's really very peaceful inside. I guess we've got it's a natural building. It feels very healthy. So we didn't use any paints. We used oil on the timber. We used clay paint and clay plaster on the inside. It maintains its own humidity at about 40 to 50%, even though it might be 99% outside. And it does that passively through its walls. So there's no, heat recovery ventilation systems or anything complicated about it. It's the nature of the building itself. And it works, which was a bit of a leap of faith for us. We hadn't seen any other hemp houses, or I think there was only one that we'd driven past. So I think that's why there's a lot of interest, because the house is, it can be 2 degrees outside and it's 19 or 20 degrees inside and 50% humidity. So it's very comfortable and it feels very clean and healthy, and there's no condensation or mold, because the moisture just gets whipped out of the house passively.
And you did most of the building yourself, so that feels quite healthy too.
Yeah, we did the building. We used the trades we had to use for compliance, but we did all the building, the hemp installation ourselves, and we got volunteers from family, friends, neighbours, social media across Victoria to come and help us. So safety was a really big thing on our site. The big safety issue with hempcrete is lime burns. Otherwise, it feels like a very safe, non-chemical sort of building site. The other big risk was height. So we needed to really look after everyone. We had lots of people coming through, and we had safety briefings and gloves and, roles and supervision to make sure everyone was kept safe.
And in terms of those materials, sourcing some of those materials you mentioned, like particularly like clay paint and clay plaster and those things, was that difficult, or did you find, how did you how did you know about them to find them, I guess is my question.
I have a book that I got from my permaculture circles. And I'm struggling to remember the author's name, but I'll pop it in the chat later on, called Clay Plasters and Paints. And it didn't cost anything because the house site excavation dug up some beautiful white clay. So we had the bulldozer people put that aside, and the plumber left some sand behind. So we made our own, and it's terrific. So we plastered the walls inside just with a mix of clay and sand. And the paint that we made, we actually repurposed the plywood that you use to build up the hempcrete walls, as a formwork. We reused that as some of the internal stud walls, and we painted those with the clay paint, which is the same clay, a little bit of sand, but a finer sand, and a bit of milk powder and bicarb soda, and that gives it that stability. And it looks actually the same as a clay plastered wall. So we have it because it's the same color clay. So very easy on the budget, and we learned to render quite respectably. I mean, we're not going for 100% perfection here, but we're not too bad at doing that now.
I mean, it's such an admirable thing, and I feel, obviously, because I'm quite passionate about this, that a lot of people don't believe in themselves, that they don't believe that they can take on new old traditions. They're very old traditions, plastering with clay and sand, but yet, you're obviously very proud, and it wasn't such a challenge, or a challenge that you couldn't meet, I guess.
We used YouTube. If there was something that we couldn't find expertise or advice on, we would just get on YouTube. There's tons of beautiful videos on there of people doing amazing things with natural building and clay renders and Tadalact, and there's beautiful resources on YouTube. So yeah, you can do it. You just need to research it and have a go.
And Talina, you've obviously worked a little bit with hempcrete in your work recently. You've done a very beautiful and successful building. So how is that process working with clients in terms of understanding their needs and coming up with a project that was going to work for them?
Well, I'm one of the directors at Envirotexture, so I haven't been involved with that particular hempcrete project myself. It's one of our New South Wales teams, but we are looking at that particular project meeting the certified passive house standard using hempcrete and without it being completely rendered and covered. So I'm sure you're referring to some photos where you see the beautiful striation of patterns and materials. So that's up in northern New South Wales. And yeah, at the moment, I believe there's an air tightness test coming up soon, as windows are in before it's halfway through construction, where they will be checking that to see how it's performing. So yeah, stay tuned on that. I'm sure we'll be plastering that all over social media once we learn a bit more, because it is possible in different ways. But another one that we have done was using strawbale recently. It was completed about 18 months ago now, and previously, with a lot of the building science learning and trying to make a home more airtight, it was reliant on all these vapor permeable membranes, and they are a plastic, and they're brilliant products, and they've got a lot of great sustainability credentials, even though they are plastic. So they are definitely fit for purpose. But with this strawbale project, we did ask the question to ourselves, could we achieve passive house without using plastic? So the lime render that we used on the strawbale walls was actually our airtight layer. And so it passed with flying colours. The clients did choose to put cladding externally and like a fibre cement sheet in this particular case. And, that was a choice, and it's they wanted it to be non-combustible in a bushfire prone area. So lots of priorities. We know other people who've done render on the outside and then plasterboard on the inside. And then yes, we've still used those wraps in place. So there's plenty of options, and we know that overseas, some people have, and Matt probably knows more about this too, have used like an OSB board, which is like a type of plywood with different strands of ply, or kind of mulched, or wood chips almost mulched all together. That can sometimes be an airtight layer. And we tried to see if the building surveyors and the engineers would let us kind of sheathe the whole building with that. It's almost like a structural plywood. At the time, they wouldn't quite buy it, and we couldn't quite find one that was definitely going to be airtight. So we didn't quite, manage to do that, but there was still a win to realize that, yeah, lime render on straw can still absolutely tick those boxes. And if you're going for that, really good air tightness and passive house certification.
So with your OSB, the ply itself actually has to be a certain class to allow vapor to move through it. So it's actually the one that you need. It's called OSB 3. It's quite hard to get your hands on at the moment, but not all plywood is vapor permeable, or it really just hasn't been tested at the moment.
Yeah, so you're looking for airtight, but vapor permeable, and in that case, it was also meant to be structural ply. So it was hard to get one product that did it all. So yes.
And at the same time, we just got to be careful with a lot of ply and engineered products, because if they do come into contact with water, they will rot very quickly.
Yeah.
So in terms of materials, Matt, you said you do know a fair bit about it as a building science nerd. So what are some of your favorite materials that you have started to work with that you're pushing, for example, that have slightly better sustainability values, or,
It's like, where do I start?
Yeah. You can start from the roof and work your way down, or you can start from the front.
Wrapping a house is essential. We want to use really quality products, and I'm going to be completely open here. I will only work on a house using ProClimate products. I will not touch anything else. The reason why is they've been tested for Australian standards. Whilst all of them have actually been tested for Australian standards, ProClimate has a warranty on their wrap for the sort of the I've lost the word, for the UV protection, that has up to 6 months external. So when we want to wrap externally, we want it to be completely continuous. Now, there's sort of two types of wraps here that we talk about, there's multiple on the market, and there's microporous, which is essentially a wrap that has little holes in it. That is what it is. There's little holes in this wrap, which means water can actually enter it. And again, once we get water into the building, that can create mold and mildew and rot our structure away. Now, the ProClimate product is monolithic, means it's complete structure. Okay, so it would actually essentially acts like a tarp. When we build our frame, we throw our wrap on and we tape it all up. Nothing's getting inside it. So it's also providing protection for our trades on site when they work, but also protecting the frame, because once we get water on that frame again, there's a high chance that mold spores will always be there. So that is my go-to first, but it's a system. Once we start to build airtight, we generally need mechanical ventilation. And that's where we usually use the Zender Q350 on our projects. And that will then deal with the internal temperature. Now, internal sort of air quality and moisture management from that perspective. Other cool building materials that we were sort of non-negotiable on. I'm just trying to think. We're generally playing with a lot of things, and I'm very high risk. I'll try anything. I don't really mind trying something new. I get bored very, very quickly, and I want to be challenged and think outside the square. So, for example, on a project we're doing a retrofit passive house at the moment in Williamstown in Victoria, and we're importing some cork flooring from overseas. It's coming in bags. We're mixing it with water on site, so it's coming from Italy because there's nothing else that we can get in Australia. but it's actually providing a certain R value for our floor of about R2. And since it's an old original volume builder house, we don't really have high ceiling height, so we can't build them up and put insulation on our floor. And that was providing a huge level of discomfort in the future of the house if we left that uninsulated. So we're able to put a 50 mil screed on this house and get a high R value in that structure. I don't think it's been done before in Australia, and it's going to be very, very interesting. But why not give it a go? But I definitely the wraps is the number one.
Yeah. And do you think you know, is there space now for people to be, you know, breaking ground with new materials or new technologies or things that like, I guess the question is always going to be, you know, can we work with what we've got or the existing science that we understand, or is it worth continuing to push for new materials to achieve better?
Every case is
sustainability
different,
outcomes?
and every project's different, and every site is different. So building in a city is very different to building out in the sticks, to building just even outside the city. A retrofit compared to a renovation or extension compared to a new build also offers different things. So if we're building new, we get a full crack at it, and there's really no excuse why we can't utilize what we have around us. Retrofit's a little bit different. We try to reuse the structure, but sometimes, unfortunately, it's just not in a great condition to use. But it doesn't mean we can't use parts of it. So a project I'm looking at the moment, that we're going to take out all the old joists of the hardwood and we're going to reuse them for some claddings or something like that. My own property at the moment, we're taking out all the old floorboards, all the old studs. I'm going to have them milled up into claddings for the ceiling. So you can reuse the materials that you have within there. It's more expensive because it means we have to play around with them. We have to de-nail them. We have to send them off to get milled up. But it comes down to where you want to spend your money. So some clients are happy to feel better and do that and understand that we have resources here, and it makes no sense to knock down a house and throw all the old hardwood that's hundreds of years old and throw it out when we can actually use it. If worst case, and look, we can throw them in a fireplace. That's maybe the worst case situation. That's a whole nother problem in itself. But I think that we should be looking at storing these materials somewhere, reusing and purposing the old hardwood studs somehow, not just chipping them up as I don't know, playground mulch that might be mixed with asbestos. Who knows? So yeah.
Yeah. And I'll mention it again. It came up in the last session last week about, you know, looking to local salvage yards and recycled material hubs when you start projects. Our Sustainable House Day guest in the first session had brought a whole lot of stuff over from Germany that they'd been collecting for years, and it made more economic sense for them to collect secondhand materials and ship it over than it did buy new materials here that were less, you know, not as good quality. So I'm going to ask you, Talina, about to explain a little bit about performance solutions and what that means in the context of natural materials or new materials or things that are a little bit experimental. So is this something you advise clients to do, or do you not think it's...
We warn them. So when it's time to go for a building permit, which is right before construction starts, you need one in whichever part of the country you're in. So sometimes it's through a building surveyor, building certifier, but you need something to prove that it's, you know, you're allowed to start building. And the building permit is based on the National Construction Code, which is really still geared towards brick veneer houses and that sort of world. So as soon as you start to do something a little bit different, it's not technically in the code. And depending on your building surveyor, you may need a performance solution report. So they're not that scary, but it's just worth understanding that if you are doing something alternative, there will be an additional report, or potentially, that will cost a little bit more money and a little bit more time from a consultant. So we just advise clients early on. We've had them for straw because of a bushfire prone area. We've had them for straw because of structural, this was sit up prefabricated straw panels, I should say. So we needed that from a structural perspective. We've had them for other SIPs, structurally insulated panels. We've had it for shorefoot footings, which are a steel footing system like stumps that uses no concrete. So they're really good on sites that can be rocky or hilly or tree roots. So sometimes things like that are a better response, but it's just understanding that you have to sort of jump through these hurdles. We've also had it for round earth. We've had it for green roofs. So, an actual garden roof growing on top of whether it's a garage or part of the house. We've even had it for accessibility and having a garage at the same level as the house, so a wheelchair could get in, and the building code wouldn't allow that, or the building surveyor, because of water might get in. So there's random things that come up all the time, but it's just worth being aware of that. There's always someone who can write the report and go, she'll be apples, it's okay, but the building surveyor might not sign it off. And I'd be curious to hear if Sarah had to get any, and Matthew's current experience with them as well.
Okay. We chose a system through an existing supplier, very well established, and it came with a code mark. So we didn't have to do any performance solutions at all. We did need to educate the Shire, the building surveyor, about what we were trying to do. They hadn't heard of hempcrete before, but I sent them a little info pack. So yeah, I'm really glad that we didn't. To me, I think doing a performance solution might have felt a bit scary, which is why we went with an established sort of product and a system.
I don't think we've ever had one say no. It's more that you have to jump through the extra hoops, which you don't want to have to do.
As the builder, I'm lucky enough just to palm them off to you, to Selena, as the architect. I sort of stay out of it, like, that's your sector.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So look, it doesn't stop it. We don't want it to be put in the too hard basket. Sorry, Rachel, because there's really good reasons why we might want to go down these paths, but it's just being aware of what hoops we're going to go through.
And it's also oftentimes word of mouth can be very handy, and talking to people who have done projects similar to the projects that you're looking at, finding, either whether or not it's the same builder or the same architect, or, comes often with the similar engineers and surveyors. That's how you can locate some people that might be able to, and if they haven't, especially builders, can work with materials that they haven't necessarily used before, but you might have to supply them with, some information or some contacts or places where you can find said information. But yes, it is definitely not the conventional route that a lot of people go down, but it is definitely worthwhile pursuing. So there has been a bit of chat around, Matthew, I was going to ask you about the wrap in terms of air tightness versus, as a health question, I guess, because there's going to be this ongoing debate about whether or not it's healthier to have a closed system or open a window. I must admit, I've been around Passive House for a long time now, and I'm still not 100% across that question.
All right, let me sell you this. So I think that how I refer to it is controlled versus uncontrolled ventilation. So we're going to talk about the majority of people who live in a city, because that's where majority of people will generally live. So when we call it uncontrolled ventilation, that's opening your windows, because I can't control what it's like outside when is it a dust storm? Is it pissing down with rain? Is it 40 degrees outside? Is it super cold? Is the air quality outside? So whatever is outside is then coming inside, because it's completely uncontrolled. Now that if we're assuming that the building's airtight, so if it's not airtight, it's coming through leaks and cracks through the building. And when we do a demolition, you will find it everywhere, all the dust, the pollutants, everything like that. So specifically where I live in Yarraville, it's about to be the second worst suburb for air quality in Australia. So if I'm relying on opening my windows with uncontrolled ventilation, that's what I'm getting, that's what I'm breathing in. Now, when we talk about controlled ventilation, which is a mechanical ventilation, that is filtering out all particulate matter up to 2.5 microns, I think, from memory. So that's your allergens, that's your dust, that's your basic sort of things that cause problems within your pollen, all that sort of stuff. So we're filtering that out and taking back control. We're then filtering supplying air to rooms like our bedrooms, our studies, our living room. We're then taking out the stale air like we would on a typical exhaust system through an extract, and we're taking that back to the mechanical ventilation source, where we're using that heat, we're recovering that heat. It's not touching the incoming heat, but we're heating up and recycling about 90% of the heat. Now, Inside, when we build airtight, water is really important because we all shower, we're cooking in boiling water, and we breathe out about 2 liters of water per day. So we need to get that water out of our structure really fast and efficiently. And using what I refer to as uncontrolled ventilation is at times we're relying on wind breezes or the wind outside to push sort of that air through. And sometimes that's just not possible. And as a builder, I also need to sign off the house. And I can't, whilst I love my clients and I trust them, I can't sign off on that because I'm relying on someone else, and humans suck. We fuck everything up. So why trust a human to breathe and ventilate that house?
I mean, I guess, you mentioned earlier that most of the jobs you're doing now are Passive House certified, or at least close to it. Is that because, more people are waking up to this, or is it just you're a really good salesman?
So going back, I'm going to be open. Like, this is when I did this whole, I'm a sustainable builder. I had no idea what it was. So I jumped on this. It sounded right. Look, I did a degree in nutrition and science. So for me, science, I back science and I trust science. We trust science with everything we did. Most of us got a COVID vaccination because we trusted science, yet we're not trusting building science. It makes no sense. So I look at mistakes that are being made overseas, and this data has been there. It's not new. It's been there since the 1980s, and every country continually makes that mistake and puts himself in huge amounts of debt because they haven't followed basic building science. So yes, I'm good at selling it, but at the same time, it all makes sense. Like, we know this. It's tested. The main thing and the really important thing that I should touch on here is, and for those who don't understand Passive House, it's a very stringent building system that we build our houses to a very, very high level, focusing on 5 key principles. So I get tested. The problem with building in Australia at the moment, I don't get inspected for my frame until I finish that build. There is so much that happens in between that. That can be about a year. The thing with Passive House, every little thing in that building gets checked off, and the clients are understanding what they're getting in that build. So they are being protected. And that is one of the biggest and most important things we need to factor into any build, because builders, again, there's a lot of bad ones out there.
And on that, I'd just like to add, that was a really great explanation, Matt, is that every house should have a ventilation strategy. So if you do choose to open your windows and doors, all of them, for an hour a day, and get all the flush, the air through, and get the air exchange out, you can choose to do that and then close it all up again. But you'll have to if it's the middle of winter, you'll have to reheat your house. There's different ways to do it. But the best example or analogy I heard, it's like a washing machine. Like, you can choose to hand wash all your clothes and spend however many hours you want to do that every week, and all your dishes. You can choose to do that. But the mechanical ventilation system is really just another appliance. It's another appliance in the home. And, they've learnt this overseas. A lot of Europeans are shocked to come to Australia and find that we don't have ventilation in our homes, let alone, any consideration for air tightness or good windows or all of that. So all yeah, a lot of the early adopters of Passive House in Australia were because there were people from overseas, expats, who had never been so cold in their life living in Australia, yet they'd come from snowy climates, and Canadians and all sorts of people. So, as Matt said, the building science does make sense from that perspective. And when you are signing off on it, it is hard to go backwards from it, because once you go, oh, well, we'll just skip that bit, then you don't know what the outcome's going to be. And that's really difficult to, put your name to.
And you won't die. Like, if you have windows and doors and you build airtight and don't have mechanical ventilation, you won't die unless you want to stay in that structure for 20, 30 days and not open it. That's very highly unlikely.
There's so many questions I want to ask, but I do want to get to, before we get to the questions, and I will say to our audience, thank you so much for your questions. I can see them rolling in. I will get to Q&A probably very soon, but I just wanted to ask Helena a little bit to explain a little bit about biophilic design and what it is and how it differs from, all of the great things that we've just been talking about. Like, is it the same thing or is it a bit different?
Well, it's still kind of science, actually, but it's not the same about building science, and it's not structural engineering, which is also a science. It's a different thing, which is all about humans' innate connection to nature, that we are a part of nature, and that our well-being is completely aligned with that of nature. And so when we are building with natural materials, and there's been study, I did my thesis on this, many years ago, but I don't think they called it biophilic design back then. But that's what it was all about, that if you are going to bring nature inside, then it actually helps with our mental health and well-being. So studies like patients got better quickly if they could, in hospitals, if they could look at the sky or a tree out a window, or have a pot plant. Like, they did all these studies, and it seemed like such a small thing, but it's amazing how many people work in offices or places that don't have a window at all for their whole day. How awful some shopping centres are and supermarkets without natural light. So it's about natural light, textures, materials, colours, shapes, pattern, movement. It also gets into psychology as well, things like prospect and refuge, and a bunch of things. It's a big topic, but it really is about our mental health and well-being. And the other bonus is that when we start to feel more connected to nature pot plants are lovely. It's not just about pot plants, but when we feel that connection and care, then we're more likely to make all decisions around material choices, food choices, clothing choices. We're more likely to make choices that are more environmentally friendly, and then we're moving towards a future that's not going to kill the planet. So, yeah.
I mean, my last question was sort of going to be around that care and also maintenance. I mean, I have a natural building background, and, I find it quite astounding that there's this perception. I mean, I understand that we want to build for longevity, but there's this perception that, when you have prefabricated materials and or, plasterboard and things, that you don't need to maintain. Whereas those who live in natural homes, particularly that have natural plasters, understand that that kind of maintenance is part of the process of building. So I guess, where do we sit on the question of maintenance? Is it something that we want our products to last forever, or do we actually want to recognize that we do have to, they say passive houses require active people. Do we want to have an continuous engagement with our home as an understood concept? I guess would be my question. I'm throwing that open to anyone.
If you want your house to last, you're going to have to look after it. Like, you buy a new car and you go get it cleaned. It just doesn't clean itself. It doesn't change its filters. It doesn't change its oil. That's just what we're used to doing. It's just a house. We become lazy. That's all it is. We're just lazy. We want everything at the click of a finger. And if we can change our habits and understand that, hey, yes, we've got to vacuum out our filter once a month and then change it over once a year. And that takes literally 30 seconds. If you can't find 30 seconds in your year, you've probably got a problem. Like, yes, you should be cleaning your windows from the outside and getting things away from the house.
Sarah, did you have anything to add to that?
I'm sorry, I was actually responding in the chat, so I didn't quite catch the last bit.
That's all right. I was talking about maintenance and upkeep, about how you
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to keep doing it, and I'm guilty of that in my my old house in Yarraville as well, that needs so much maintenance and painting and so much work. And so keep on top of it. Absolutely. Choose good quality, I think, and then keep, don't let all the repairs build up, because it just becomes overwhelming if you do that. So keep on top of it.
The other thing early on, if we often have clients asking for low maintenance and do they want to repaint in 10 years or 20 years? So it's looking potentially at, if you're talking about external cladding, maybe choosing something that doesn't need painting, because there's a ton of different options. So it's understanding that as well.
I think it's also following the installation guides. So many people skip so many steps in these guides. If you look at a painting guide just externally, how many like DIY people will just go throw on 2 coats of top coat? You need to put the primer on first and follow the whole system, because that's what it's warranted for. And that's how you get the products to last. So skipping those steps, yes, it might be cheap up front, but it's going to be very expensive in the long term.
We did plan for maintenance to some extent, because we didn't want to be outside upstairs painting windows. And we're in a bushfire rated area, and we chose an alley clad window that's clad in aluminium colour bond on the outside. and so we don't have to paint. We don't have to paint the outside of the house. It's you know, it's fantastic.
One last thing on that, sorry if I may, is around touching on that idea of quality and durability. So I hate seeing people pull out kitchens and redo them from 20 years ago because they go, oh, it's out of date, I need a new one. And it's such a waste, and it happens all the time. So things like that, if you choose well, and this comes back to those biophilic materials as well, that things like that don't go out of fashion. They're not, bricks and timber and render and natural pallets, they really don't date. And so if you're looking into that, then things are not going to be ending up in landfill in 10 20 years time, because our buildings should last for 100 years or more. Like, that's what we should be building for. It's a big investment. You want it to be around and not just have to replace it all in a few years time.
It also comes down to cost as well. I think there was a study done recently, and I heard this at a conference, where our mortgages are generally 30 years, I think, on average. The average Australian house, when they build it, isn't lasting 30 years. So by the time they need to fix and redo that house, which is about 20 years, you're paying for 2 builds at once. So it makes sense to do it right from the start, because especially with interest rates and cost of living at the moment, I don't know if anyone can afford it, but if you do and you have a money tree, let me know, because I would like to use it. But we all generally can't afford that. So building it right from the start, long term, and there's some great initiatives with green loans through, say, Bank Australia and other banks at the moment, where if you build this way, you're going to get around 50 basis points off your interest loan. So there's also incentives to build correctly now too, and use the correct materials.
And build smaller and more efficiently, for sure. I'll get to some of the audience questions. Thank you so much for putting the questions in. This one might be, I guess, more relevant for Sarah and Talina, which is, can any of the panelists speak to the best materials for bushfire rating? So where do you start with that kind of question? Because I guess you have to, some people who live in high bale zones can only buy certain windows, for example, or so how do they manage that?
Yeah, we have Bale 29 here. So we thought pretty hard about what that meant for us. So we had to use the bushfire rated resistant hardwoods. We discovered a intumescent paint invented by the CSIRO, which is a paint that you put on that if an ember drops on it, the paint all blisters and burns, but it protects the, sort of a sacrificial lamb, and it protects the timber below. We use the aluminium clad windows and the aluminium screens. Did lots of, can't have gaps more than 2 millimeters. Deleted our deck and just have stone paving around the house instead of the decking that we had originally thought we wanted. So, and lime render and hempcrete doesn't burn as long as you keep the embers out of your building fabric. It's a pretty incredible material. But we did some cheeky things, like, because we couldn't afford a hardwood, we have exposed beams, and we couldn't afford those to be hardwood, but we made them out of pine, and we put that intumescent paint over them. So, and we have lovely spotted gum lined eaves, which was more of an aesthetic thing because it's really beautiful. It's a little bit Japandi, Japanese sort of styling. But yeah, we did a lot of thinking, and also in the garden. I'm actually a gardener, not a builder. And we have deciduous trees planted around the house, and lots of northern, solar passive, but trees around the outside that will catch the embers and slow down the high winds associated with bushfire. So there's a whole bunch of learning to do and research to do if you're building in one of those areas.
I don't think I've got much to add. That, yeah, we do Bale 29 quite often, and yeah, all of those things. There's always materials you can use, and that we have a lot of the good builders we work with too. They want to be building it up at that standard anyway, because your Bale rating is kind of the minimum, and it doesn't mean your house is not necessarily going to burn down, because fire is unpredictable. So quite often it's going a little bit higher and doing a bit better as well to try and protect.
How would you treat a fire zone?
Sorry?
How would you treat a fire zone then?
treat a fire
Like, yeah, a fire
Flame-
zone, like
flame
a flame
zone.
zone. So like a full.
flame zone. I haven't done that myself. I know I'm pretty sure our Sydney team has. It's a lot of bushfire shutters on the windows. So, you know, like roll metal shutters and things. One of our houses actually, I think the whole thing flapped down, like, you know, big movable awnings and things that could be shut down. So yeah, and that was a lot of metal cladding on that one. So the same as what you'd use for roofing, it was for the cladding. So yeah, there's always ways to deal with it, but the cost does go up, the level of detail. And yeah, built or bunkers. I've seen a lot of not bunkers, but concrete houses above the ground. There's ways to do it, but it gets expensive.
There's
And a lot of building surveyors
there's-
will force you to clear the trees too.
Well, council permits will require you to clear trees off for the building permit. There are a lot of great examples on our Green Rebuild Toolkit. If you want to go and have a look, there's Earth Sheltered House there by our good friend Alvin Williams and Soft Loud Architects, who's built an earth covered house that is built in what was a flame zone, or it was a very high BAL rated area because his parents lost their house in 2009. So there's some great examples on the Green Rebuild Toolkit. So I'll go from the country to the city, Matt, and ask you about building in suburbia. There's a question about doing an eco build for a timber framed lightweight house. I guess what are the suggestions? Where do you start with that kind of question?
So what's the actual question?
What about those who are building in suburbia? How do we do an eco build? What is an eco
So not big thick straw. Is that what they're asking?
Yeah. So I'm a great believer of simple shit works. Like, let's not try reinvent the wheel. So typically our houses, from a framing external point of view, will build with 140 mil studs at 600 mil centers. You just need to get that okayed by engineer, because we can actually reduce the amount of thermal bridging through our studs by about 30% from memory. So we can then get around about an R4 insulation batt into that structure. We'll wrap that externally. We'll then wrap that internally. All right. So we'll then, on each side of that stud, we'll build a cavity, because we need to allow water and moisture again to drain on the external side of it, because we have a thing called condensation. If you don't know what that is, just get a beer can out of your fridge and put it on the table, and that water that drops off is condensation. So on the inside, we'll then get another R1 batt in our cavity. So we're typically having a wall structure that's got about R5. And then on a roof structure, we're typically running anything between an R6 to R8, and on our floor around an R5. Now, these aren't expensive. They're actually quite effective. If you can build a timber subfloor as well, you'll find your build costs will come down. Plus, you're also able to remove the need for concrete, which is kind of important at times. So that is our typical structure of a build, and 95% of our builds, I'd say, around that way. Okay, we have dabbled with things like SIPs and stuff. Whilst they're great, walking in both types of house, I'd just say I feel like a conventional frame built house with insulation has a nicer feel from a comfort perspective. So not just everyone thinks comfort is thermally, it's also sound, vibration, odors, all these other things. So I find that type of structure and taking things back to basic is a very, very easy way to build, I'd say, an eco house to start with. And then also good windows. Windows are super important. I will not build a house with aluminium windows. I'll be straight out there honest, unless they're very, very low U values, which we're not going to get most likely in Australia, but we're typically looking at Alu-clad or UPVC. And then it's all just about getting it airtight and mechanical ventilation. What it looks like, what colors you paint, well, that makes no difference to me, but we want to build a good structure, and that's how we make it sustainable.
So yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, add to that, and you know, Matt's talking specifically sort of around Melbourne there too with those insulation values. This really is climate specific, so it can change drastically once you come to central Victoria and go down to Tassie. If you're in Queensland or, you know, across the country, it is going to be different. So that's why you need to know it's not a one size fits all approach to here's how thick your walls have to be. But certainly with what Matt's describing, that's not typical in the building code yet, but it should be, and especially with, you know, the move to 7 stars in that climate, that's the minimum that should be.
Yeah, it's common sense.
What it is, but it's taking a long time for the industry to catch on. So yeah, it does need to be checked for your specific site in your climate and the shape of your building. Is it 2 stories? Is it long? And yeah, all of that.
So from a cost perspective as well, I think I ran the numbers on a project and we looked at comparing a 90-45 at 450 centers, which is typical framing with an R2.7 bat compared to our R4 with 600 mil centers at 140 studs. I think it added $3,000 to the project, and that's on a $1 million project. So there is very little difference as a percentage in that. If you're worried about that $3,000, reduce your joinery budget.
So, and I'm guessing here we're going to have maybe a little bit of a split on the panel around the pros and cons of concrete. It's always going to be a bit of a conversation starter or a stopper, depending on where you sit from the, you know, because I come from a place that is looking for more mass in terms of the way that we, you know, take in heat and put it out. But I'm guessing that it's not the only solution that is being looked at the moment. So where do we sit on concrete and what can we do with it, I guess? Because there's a question here about renovating a concrete slab house.
Every project's different. It depends on your structure. So the first thing we need to look at is what your soil conditions are and what the house needs from a load point of view. That is the first thing. Some sites we need a concrete slab, and I think the issue around concrete and people get concerned about it is it's one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the world. But on the flip side, there are a lot of rapid developments in this area. I know Wholesome have an eco-pack concrete where they're taking out the Portland cement and replacing that with fly ash and slag. And we just did a concrete slab about a year ago that had this. It was fully no bad stuff in it. So from a installation point of view, the concrete has said there was not much difference. However, what we do need to, and this goes back to healthy building materials, there is some studies around fly ash and slag because that does come from a coal furnace. And if we're grinding that in our house, the polished concrete slab, what are the health implications if that is starting to be breathed in? And that is something we do need to consider.
Someone's going to be polishing that slab. And where do you sit, Talina, on the concrete question?
Look, we're finding that our work is my work is across Victoria. The rest of our team are doing work across New South Wales mainly. We do elsewhere as well, but in Victoria, when we are doing a concrete slab, it usually needs to be insulated because the whole ground coupling, it doesn't quite stack up when you look at the science and the numbers and the temperature differentials. So you actually need an insulated slab in the same way that you're insulating your roof and your walls. It needs separation from the outdoor environment. And when you insulate your slab, that's when it gets more complex. There's like a ton of different ways to do it with insulation over, insulation under. We've done them all. But usually that insulation quite often has to be an XPS, which is an expanded polystyrene, which is a type of plastic, but it's got compressive strength. It's not going anywhere. It's going to last for a really long time. But once you start to look into insulating your slab, that brings this whole other level of complexity. So what we also learned with the building science is, yes, a thermal mass of a slab can be awesome in particular locations like Canberra, where they have sunny winters and the sun shines every day and it's going to warm up and you actually have calculated you've got enough mass and it's not going to stay cold. Somewhere like Ballarat, where it's overcast for like half of the year, doesn't always get enough heat in. So it stays cold unless you're making sure that you've got enough heat. So it's not just about the mass. You have to also look about the insulation and the air tightness holistically. So yeah, it's not the mass and glass of the 70s when it was all single glazing back then too. It's come a long way in actually understanding there's a bit more to it.
Yeah, I'm sure you look back at some of those Knox houses now that were slightly cold, let's just say. I don't think they were particularly airtight or they didn't have the greatest passive solar design on them either.
And they had beautiful big wood fires usually. Like this was even pre-gas, right? So they just had a big open fire and that's what you did to keep warm because there kind of wasn't any other options. But we've learned that burning stuff inside our house is not great for our health. And then, we moved to gas. The government said natural gas, it's a great thing. It's a short-term solution and yeah, it's cheap. So let's all do that. And now we know that we have to get off gas. It's not, yeah, you can speak more to that. You've written the Get Off Gas, the book.
Yeah.
The guide. So
Yeah.
yes, you know, we're moving with the times, and these days the homes were, you know, it's still related to materials, an energy efficient split system, you know, reverse cycle air conditioner can heat in summer, maybe the other way around, heat in winter, cool in summer, super efficient. And if you've got solar panels generating it and you've got a really efficient building envelope, then you hardly need to use it. And we've got clients who have got it there more as future proofing as the climate extremes get more, but they don't use it.
I just might add really quickly, solar passive design. We haven't really talked about that so much, particularly in urban areas. That can be a challenge, but get it right because it's so important to use the sun on your slab. We had a lot of trouble finding someone to do an insulated slab, but we have got the XPS foam, really, really happy with it. And we did a burnished slab, so we didn't have anyone grinding our slab. It was burnished in construction and just oiled with Livos oil, and it's lovely.
I'm going to say something here, and it might annoy any architects, but if you're designing a house and you're not including passive solar principles in your design, you're not doing your job. I'm going to be just straight out.
Absolutely.
Like that's just doing your job. Every house should be that way. Passive house is just that on steroids and adding a few extra elements. So both are just very, very important factors in the way we should build.
I just add one more thing though. What we've learned surprisingly with the passive house modeling is, you know, solar passive design, we learned you never have south facing windows, right? It's all about the north. And then we have clients with have beautiful views to the south. So, oh, we can't put a window there at all. And we went, oh, okay, we'll give you a window. And we were able to check the energy balance in the modeling and know that we had enough insulation to be okay with doing that and making sure, obviously, our north has got appropriate shading. The other thing with solar passive design, just jumping on that, is that most of the calculations people are looking at are for summer solstice midday and winter solstice midday. Is that working? And it's not always taking into account what happens in the mornings and the afternoons or at the equinox. So shading is really important, but you do have to think about it more holistically. It's not just at the solstices at midday. Although eaves are great for that on the north, absolutely. But yeah, don't forget the other scenarios.
I think it's really important to get energy consultants such as a PHPP, the passive house site, or an energy radar involved very, very early to make educated decisions around the performance of a house too, because we can also link it directly to cost. So all the projects we're involved, we're running these numbers simultaneously with everyone involved so we can pick the right materials that suit the project for the cost. So it's no point leaving that towards the end because it's just too late.
I've got another question I wanted to raise earlier. I will get to there's one question here about internal materials that I'll get to, but I was interested in, you know, the breakdown between doing you know, getting someone like yourself, Matt, a full builder with construction who does, you know, I'm assuming you do a full project in terms of organizing a lot of it, to those who want to be able to do some of it themselves. So how does it work between the builders and the owner builders to be able to get the best outcomes from, you know, because I know a lot of people get bullied out of using certain materials by their builders because they believe that the builder doesn't like the fancy of that particular aspect and they think they know better. So how does that conversation go down?
All right. So there's two ways I can take this. I think you need to find the right builder if they're not allowing you to use correct materials. Now, I'm open here. I'm totally fine with owner builders, but I think we got to make sure they're using licensed trades. And especially on that structure side of things, that is really, really important. It doesn't really matter. Like as a builder, we need to, like, it comes down to insurance a lot of the time and what can be put on a building permit and what can't be. And it's a little bit more complicated. But I would say owner builders are completely fine, but you need to have the knowledge about what you're looking at. Typically, a lot of owner builders will look for cheap and nasty, and that's given them a bad name over time. But there are some very, very good older owner builders. I know that you, Sarah, have done your own house, and your architect has actually done an owner builder themselves. And it can be done properly. But it's all about, it comes back to, again, the basics. It's using the correct materials for the right applications. So there's definitely a place for both people.
Yeah, the I guess the safety net is the builder surveyor doing those inspections, but I have to say they hardly inspect. They don't do many inspections, and we had a really good relationship with our building surveyor and would ask him questions if we came up with any problems that we couldn't solve. But yeah, they do the structural inspection, they do and then the finish. But I think they should do a few more inspections to satisfy themselves that the energy treatments are being correctly installed. There's not a lot of evidence once the building's all closed up that that all of those sustainability treatments have been correctly purchased and installed.
Yeah, so testing your house is really important. When we refer to testing, that's a blower door test, that's thermal imaging walkthrough of the way the insulation is installed. It's also a visual check over of the building. But I couldn't agree more. We need to introduce more, and that's more a political thing, that we need to introduce more inspections into our buildings, sort of building permit. People argue, hey, it's going to cost more. But I tell you what's expensive is when you got to come back and fix it.
And if you ever have a look at the My Efficient Electric Home Facebook group, as I do, you see what happens for a lot of people who don't check the work of the trades. And they, I think there's becoming a little bit more of a voice around people actually being more aware of some of the impacts of some of the trades that they're getting to do renovations or retrofits, particularly when it comes to insulation, particularly when it comes to some of the other small jobs that, are in places that we don't want to go to. I think there seems to be a little bit more awareness and or desire for oversight when it comes to getting certain builders in or getting certain trades in. So I'll ask a question about internal material choices from Mandy, who's doing a new build. What recommendations do you have for cabinetry materials and bench tops, without being too specific? I guess it's a specific question. Matt, do you have an answer to Lena?
Selena, you can go first on this one.
Interiors is hard. It's not regulated in the same way as it is with, or there's not as much information out there yet. The most sustainable kitchen is to recycle an old one and upcycle and get one on Gumtree, and often they're at hardwood, but we know that that's not always appropriate. So often the carcasses are made out of MDF boards. So you're trying to make sure that that's a low emission, non-toxic MDF if you are doing that, because that's the standard. But then when it comes to bench tops, there are so many different options out there, whether it's stone, stainless steel, most of the reconstituted stones we can't use at the moment, but there's different ones on the market. There's solid surface, did I say timber? There's concrete, there's tiles, like ceramic tiles you can use. There's it's a bit of a wormhole. I think I've got some links that will be sent through after this to some places that you can go to find more sustainable materials, because it comes down to, again, durability and fit for purpose and budget and all of that. So if you're working with an architect, designer, interior designer, they can help go through a lot of that with you as well.
We want to hit things that have high surface area. So paints. So you want to use a paint with a low VOC, and a VOC is a volatile organic compound. And we want to reduce that. So anything that has high surface area, your floorboards, we want to use glues that are low VOC as well. We want to avoid carpet as much as possible. Carpet sucks. We should be removing that from a lot of buildings. It collects dust and mold and all these other things. So again, carpet is on a high surface area. So it's things like that where we really, really want to look at, like no vinyl flooring. I know Talina's put a list to the red list from the Declare label. We should be looking at products that are healthy for indoor air quality and environment, and that's where I would start.
Well, there's a question that's just come in that's about a building designer suggesting to use fibre cement sheeting instead of traditional wooden weatherboards. So how do you respond to that?
I pick me. Cement sheet's a really bad product because it is killing people. It has a high silica content, and whilst we've actually banned in engineered stone, so engineered stone typically had anywhere between 60 to 80% silica. Cement sheet has around 60%, but for some fucking stupid reason, we're still trusting James Hardy, who say that's okay. And if we just need to look back in history, they also said asbestos was okay. So I have actually banned on all of my sites cement sheet. I will walk away from a project because I like my team and I want them to live as long as possible. And if I can prevent that, them being around materials like that, where we're cutting cement sheet. The other day, we actually had a bit of fun and we actually cut it as per the specifications with their own vacuum that they suggest. There is still dust. So people are breathing it. Whilst the person who is cutting it up has a mask on, doesn't mean everyone else is on site has one or someone walking past. So I think we need to stop trusting people in the sense of companies who say, oh, we'll do the right thing. And a perfect option to that is there is an MGO board that you can use. It substitutes everything. And we've substituted all our products that are typically cement sheet based for an MGO board, and it's working completely fine. And that has a zero silica.
I would also suggest to anyone in the audience tonight that you have a look at some of the houses on the Sustainable House Day page, and you can go through every single house has a profile and every single house has a building materials list that is listed in there, and you can start to see some of the materials. And I'm sure if you look through a dozen or a couple dozen houses as I have, you'll start to see a pattern with the kinds of materials, especially for internals, that people are using in their homes, and you can start to get an idea of alternatives there. I'll give it my last question. I've only got 3 minutes left. And I know you'll like this one, Matt. What is the most sustainable product for building the frame?
Steel frames? I think, Selena, that's what you think, isn't it? Steel frames? No, I'm joking. That's me being completely sarcastic. Avoid steel. Steel frames are the shittest thing ever, and we should not be touching them whatsoever. So they're a thermal bridge. They get sold that they're fire rated. It's pure marketing. Look, it's everything. It goes back to, again, everything is a system. It's just not pick one thing and pick what you want. And I understand and respect that everyone has different budgets and limitations, but it is more important to consider enoughness and build a house that is small and suits your needs and build it correctly than build this McMansion that just sucks. So stick with simple shit, typical frame, wrap it inside and outside. Deal with your moisture inside and your ventilation, good quality windows, put your money there. They're things that at the start, once you build a frame and you build your structure, that can't really change. You can always add in some joinery in the future. You can always change your floor coverings in the future. You can't change your frame and your structure and windows that easily.
Talina, did you want to add to that?
No, I mean, look, there is a place for steel, sure, and it can be endlessly recycled, but it's not. It's one of the highest embodied carbon, intensive materials to use. And so if you can use timber, and there's different types of pine framing as well, or, you can look at other natural materials as well, but the steel can cause so many problems that are just not being made well known to people.
In terms of the way it impacts the other materials, or in terms of its...
In terms of the thermal bridging. So as soon as you get one of those thermal cameras and go around, and you'll see there's insulation between the steel frames. There's been a bunch of stories of people with, plasterboard, and they're getting strips of mold on their plasterboard or on their ceiling, and they didn't know why. They're like, why is there mold growing there? This is really random. Is it a pattern? Is it insects? And it was because that steel frame, all the cold is coming from outside and traveling through to the inside. There's no break between the inside and the out, because metal's a conductor. That's why we don't touch hot pants, right? Metal is not meant to be used in that way unless you have an insulated envelope around it. So it is absolutely possible. There's a school in Scotland that was built to the certified passive house standard with a steel frame, but they still said that was not a choice. They actually wanted to made it more difficult. They did it, but yeah, there's a lot of reasons why steel is not ideal.
I wrote a blog on this and I'll chuck it in the chat. I hate steel frames.
Yeah, and
anyone-
I just feel like it's going to be one of those things like black tile roofs that, you know, we're going to be dealing with for a really long time because it's so prolific and it is such a thing that's either for cost reasons or for stylistic reasons has become, you know, everywhere, and that a lot of people would have been sold that idea about steel as
So it's-
being
Yeah,
equal
steel
to-
frames, they'll also try sell you a thermal bridge strip with it. It doesn't work. It's actually been tested, it doesn't work. So they would tell you that they can combat it. They definitely can't.
And look, I once heard Joost Bakker, who's, you know, amazing eco warrior, like does some experimental stuff, have a lot of respect for him. And I remember him talking about that pine plantations are the opposite of biodiversity. Like they're a monoculture. They are not a beautiful, thriving ecosystem. So his argument was we shouldn't still be planting those forests and chopping down those trees. So he made a good point, but the answer wasn't just make everything out of steel. Like that's a whole other bunch of environmental problems to try to be manufacturing steel for our buildings. So it comes back to that bigger thing of, do we need to start looking at bamboo, which is fast growing, and there's a lot of movement to try and get bamboo structures up and off the ground, because that can be considered way more sustainable than chopping down trees that take many, many years to grow. It goes back again to what we started with, building smaller and not using as many materials and all of that. So it's there's a lot of, it's not just a one-sided argument. There is a lot of different facets to it. But yeah, once you weigh them all up, which, you know, a lot of us have been weighing up these pros and cons for many, many years. Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end, and I'm just going to ask you all, thank you so much for such an engaging conversation. I just want to ask you all for your one takeaway, and you have exactly 60 seconds each. So I'll start with you, Talina. What is your one takeaway that you would like the audience to take away tonight about building materials and building fabric?
What if we cared as much about the ingredients of our house or the ingredients of our materials as we did about our food? So thinking about healthy food, and there is a healthy construction material pyramid that's come out of Denmark or something. I can put the link in, but yeah, just thinking about it from that perspective, like how healthy is it?
How healthy are our homes? Matt, what's your takeaway?
All the answers are there. This isn't new. It's not like you're doing this for the first time, trying to work this out. All the technology is there. All the answers are out there for you to find it. It's just sometimes you've got to really dig around. That would probably be the biggest advice and takeaway that I'd give anyone.
And Sarah, what would you like to leave?
I've had a little bit more time to think. So I think you've got to do your research. You've got to learn. It's so interesting to learn about all this stuff, but really get in, ask questions. Beware of greenwashing. There's a lot of it out there. I do get really good value out of my Renew membership that I have had for over 10 years, or a lot longer than 10 years. But just find your people who are aligned with your values. So it can be really hard to find the tradies that are going to do the right thing by you, but you're working, certainly as an owner builder, you're working very closely with them and you know exactly what's happening. But yeah, a lot of research and learning and curiosity, I think, and being aware of what you're buying and all the implications, and yeah, be open-minded. Yep.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. And I think that'll bring us to the end of our session. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists, Matt, Talina, and Sarah. You've been so generous and hopefully very informative. And I think we've delivered a lot of really key information to the audience about building materials. I want to thank again all of our sponsors who have made these sessions possible and who help us year on year deliver Sustainable House Day and these extension sessions to hopefully a growing audience. We hope that you will join us for our next session on Thursday, where the topic being discussed is getting glazing right, all about windows. So I deliberately didn't talk about some of the windows questions tonight because I think you should all tune in on Thursday for the session devoted to windows. And please don't forget to join, renew, or subscribe to one of our magazines to support the work that we do. And for a wealth of information on sustainable design and living, you can follow the chat and please get on board. Thanks for watching. Good night.